The scripture today is from the 13th chapter of John, verses 1 through 11. It was just before Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that's why he said not everyone was clean. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Well, I hope you all had a happy Thanksgiving break. I know my family, we did. We had a lot of fun. We got to relax, ate really good food. And I don't know if your house is like mine. Last night we put up the Christmas tree, and it was beautiful. We went through the boxes to find which ornaments were broken from last year during the move, and which ornaments were still together. We checked to see if we had enough lights for the tree, and we barely made it. But we were excited to put the tree up. And you may notice that it's after Thanksgiving. Why aren't the Christmas decorations up already? We do have little trees, but we also know there's a lot more to it, and those aren't up. And the reason is because this is not yet Advent. Usually the first Sunday after Thanksgiving is the first Sunday of Advent. But this year's a little different. This year the first Sunday after Thanksgiving is Christ the King Sunday. Christ the King Sunday is usually the week before Thanksgiving, but this year we get to celebrate it all on its own. So I'm excited to be with you all today to talk about Christ our King. So if you'll bow your heads, I'm going to open us in prayer. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. Amen. So it is Christ the King Sunday, where we celebrate that Christ is King not only of our lives, but Christ is King of all creation. Christ sits on God's throne, maybe just like the one right here above us. And usually Christ the King Sunday, like we said, is not something we think a lot about because we're always stuck in the holidays. But thankfully, we have a King who is good. And we have Christ the King who does not force himself on us, does not tell us always what to do, but is patient and loving. Because history is chock full of bad kings. Kings who kill, kings who maim, kings who go to war over insignificant reasons, kings who steal, kings who hate, kings who do all kinds of bad things. And we don't really have that experience because we don't have kings over us anymore. We don't sit under a king anymore. We don't listen to a king anymore. So sometimes we don't know what to think about these things. But we do have authorities over us. We do have people over us, and sometimes we have authority over other people. Because Christ the King Sunday is really an example for us on how we are to exercise authority, how we are to exercise leadership. Because Christ is our leader. Christ is our authority. And we see authority all around us, whether it's bosses, whether it's parents, being a parent to someone or having parents, whether it's being a teacher and having children under you, whether it's being a pastor and having people you lead. We see authority all the time. And unfortunately, we also see authority being misused. Whether you look in politics or in pop culture or in sports, you see people that have been given authority and power and have used that authority and power to hurt others. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. But Christ is a different kind of king. Christ would not do those things. Christ is a king who served and loved first. And that was the point of our scripture passage today. Christ was not a king who sits on a throne way high above us, but Christ is a king rather that's in our lives and who serves us. Christ was a king who was willing to do the dirty jobs of life. Now, I don't know if you remember, there was a show a few years ago called Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. I don't know if any of you remember that. It's where Mike, am I all crackly?
It keeps touching your lip.
There we go. Scuba. So, there we go. That's a little bit better. Dirty Jobs was a great show where Mike Rowe, the host, went each week to a different dirty job. And he experienced it. He experienced what it was really like to do that career for a week. All of the goods and all of the bads. And it was a lot of fun to watch all the different jobs he had. But after the season, I think it was like 7 or 8 seasons long, where he did different, like 20 jobs a year. After it was all over, they went and asked him, what are the 5 worst jobs you had to do? The dirtiest, yuckiest, worst jobs you had to do over those 5 years. And he made a list. And so it's a pretty interesting list. Number 5 was charcoal maker. Now, I don't know if you know what goes to making of charcoal, but you're basically burning wood, but not fully burning. You're just kind of charring the outside of it. And he said in the process, you get dirt and ash everywhere, head to toe. And he said, you feel gross. And he says, the smell doesn't get out of your clothes for weeks. And he said, it's terrible. Now, the number 4 dirtiest job was animal renderer. Now, it sounds complicated, but that's basically the way that you take an animal and turn it into dog food and cat food. And if you can think about that process, you can quickly understand why that would just be a horrible job to be around. So, animal renderer, all the smells and everything. The number 3 dirtiest job was bridge painter. And especially he talked about a bridge in northern Michigan that was so long that by the time he finished painting it, by the time the people that worked there finished painting it, they then had to go back and start over again. It was so long. But he said no matter what you wore, no matter how many precautions you took, by the end of the job, by the end of the day, you were covered, head to toe, you were covered in paint. He said there was really nothing you could do to avoid it because you're in these tiny crawl spaces painting all day constantly. So it was hot and it was disgusting. The number 2 dirtiest job was miner. Now that makes sense, right? You've all seen pictures of miners covered in mine dust, have mine in your lungs, or coal in your lungs, coal in your eyes. Miner was the second dirtiest job. And the most dirty job he did in 7 years of doing this show, where he had hundreds of jobs, was called lift pump tech. And you may not know what that is. I didn't when I first heard it. But it is the only job in the human waste disposal process that still requires a human being to operate a machine and to get dirty. And so if you can imagine how all of your sewage gets taken care of, there is a person that has a lift pump tech that has to help with it. And he said it was one of the worst days of his life, having to get through all of that. And he said he felt like the smell stayed with him for forever. And that's really gross stuff. I hope maybe some of you, your skin are crawling, you're like, oh, you're turning my stomach, Travis. That's so gross. I hope some of you are grossed out just a little bit. Because that's how we should think about foot washing. That's how we should think about the dirty job that Jesus did. So often today, not many people like foot washing even today. They find it gross. But back then it was 10 times worse. Because Jesus was washing the feet of first century Christians, first century people who walked all day. They wore sandals all day and they walked dirty, dusty, muddy roads all day. That's what they did. And so the dirt would get caked up to your knees. It would get caked into your skin. It would get into your hair. It would get into your toenails. It would get everywhere. And it was disgusting, right? You can sense it. Just gross. Like Jamie's face is like, oh, terrible. Because it's gross. And usually the job of foot washing is the job of a slave or a servant. It was the lowest of the low. The lowest servant, the lowest slave. Usually it was like children slaves would do it. And that's why when Jesus came to Peter, he was horrified. Like, no, Jesus, no, not you. This is not, no, Master, let me wash your feet. Never will you wash my feet. And I imagine many of the disciples felt the same way. Because Jesus was their leader. Jesus was their king. He was their authority. And never in that society would a person like that ever get down on his knees and wash feet. But Jesus had been telling the disciples that his life was about service all along. And apparently they never listened, which isn't a surprise because we see the disciples are bad listeners. Jesus was telling them that his ministry and his life was about doing the dirty jobs. It was about putting himself last. And we see this again and again and again in Scripture. just a few of the verses. In Matthew 19 it says, Many who are first shall be last, and many who are last shall be first. In Matthew 20, first shall be the last, and the last shall be first. In Matthew 23, the greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. In Matthew 10 it says, For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. In Luke 22, And there arose a dispute among the disciples as to which one of them would be regarded the greatest. And Jesus said to them, The king of the Gentiles lorded over them, about who is the best, and who is in authority, and who is the king. But it is not this way with you. But the one who is the greatest among you must become like the youngest. The leader must become like the servant. And if you open the rest of the Bible up, if you read the rest of the Bible again and again and again, we are given this picture of servant leadership, where we are to put ourselves last so that others may be made first. On and on, Jesus is sharing this message of being a servant first. To do the work of God means giving up doing the hard, giving up the pretense and the power and the glory of being in charge, but rather doing the messy, dirty work of loving people, of serving people, getting our hands and feet dirty in the lives of the people around us. But today, I set up things a little differently. You will see we have a little throne above us to remind us it's Christ the King Sunday. And we live in the world where we don't have a king, but it's helpful to remember the world that Jesus and his disciples lived in. They lived in a world with a king named Emperor. He was the Roman Emperor Augustus, and they saw his symbols around them all the time. They were constantly reminded who was in charge. And they didn't have Twitter, and they didn't have the TV or the newspaper to see it, but instead they had their coins in their pockets. And on the coins was printed the image of the king. It was printed the image of their emperor and all of the symbols of the emperor's rule, the symbols that we see in front of us. Symbols were present in the marketplaces, and the coins they used, they were everywhere. To start with, before we even go up there, you may not know this, but our own sanctuary, our own church buildings are built on the model of a Roman courtroom. The idea with a raised platform up front, with benches out there, and with aisles leading towards the front, were built on the idea of a Roman courtroom with a judge sitting over people. And people would come to him. And the Roman throne room was built in the same way. So even here we live in a place that's not too unfamiliar from a Roman courtroom. But then when we go up, first, this small staff would be called a scepter. And it was imported from the Egyptians, and it was used as a symbol of the king's power, the emperor's power. With this small staff, he could point at you, and he could send his armies to attack your people, and he could kill everyone you know, everyone you love, everyone you've ever loved, everyone you will love. It's simply the dipping of his staff. That's what the scepter stood for. The scepter stood for unmitigated violent power of an unbelievable scale. That was what the Roman emperor was like. Next, we have these fine robes. Because the Roman emperor was always dressed in fine robes with purple. That's why I wore a little purple today, because I thought it would be fun. But the Roman emperor always wore purple, because purple was the most expensive thing you could buy in that world. It wasn't diamonds, it wasn't gold, it wasn't jewels, it was the color purple. Because the color purple was only found by crushing little bitty shells found in the Black Sea. And it was so expensive to make a purple cloth that most people, even the richest people, could only afford to have a tiny purple stripe in their cloak. Just a tiny purple stripe. But then when you see the emperor walk out and he's literally covered head to toe in purple, you are awed by his power and his wealth. It is a symbol that not only is he powerful, but he is the most wealthy human on earth because he was clothed in purple. And then next we have his crowns. Often we think of crowns as gold and jewels, but the Romans didn't value gold and jewels that much. They instead valued slaves. And this laurel crown was a wreath that they wore on their heads, a small wreath of branches. And you might think, well, that's no big deal. That seems kind of minor. But when you think about it, every day, I picked these last night and they're already starting to die. Every day, these wreaths would die. So every morning, someone would have to go out into the gardens, would have to pick new branches. Someone else would have to weave those branches into a crown that could fit his head. Someone else would then have to trim all of the thorns and all of the pokey parts on it, Because you certainly didn't want to put authority crown on the emperor's head and poke him, because then you might die. And so every day, this crown that he wore symbolized enormous amounts of slave labor. And the king wore it on his head to show, not only do I have power of armies, not only do I have power of wealth, but I also have power over people who have bought and sold their lives. Everything he wore had a meaning. Everything he wore also had a symbol. But the great thing about Christ, our King, is Christ knew these symbols too. And Christ was constantly finding ways to subvert them. He was finding ways to say these symbols are not the source of true power. They are an illusion of power. But the true power comes from being a servant. And so instead of a scepter, Christ redefined what power means. Instead of a scepter, Christ didn't carry that. Christ instead carried a simple wooden shepherd's staff. The type of thing not to beat or to abuse, but to point and guide. To help guide the sheep into the pens, to help guide people and to guide his people. The shepherd's staff was his symbol. His power was a symbol of love, patient, guiding love, rather than armies marching around the world. So Jesus started with a simple staff. And Jesus didn't wear robes. He wasn't that wealthy. So that was not a meaningful symbol for him. Instead, Jesus wore an old towel. In our passage today, we read about Jesus taking an old towel and wrapping it around himself to wash the feet of his servants. It wasn't one of those fancy, soft, nice towels you put out for your guests, and you may not love I brought this one here. But it's one of those gross, bleach-stained towels that you always keep hidden, but you use to clean up the messes the kids in your house or your neighbors make. It's that gross towel. It's always sitting there that you don't want anyone else to see. That was the type of garment that Jesus wore. It was the common towel used to clean someone's disgusting feet. And finally, our King had no slaves. And he had no laurel crown. Instead, his was a crown of thorns. That our King, our Lord, suffered and died the most horrible fate that Rome could offer. But the crown reminds us that he came back. The crown reminds us that the power of this earth had no power over him. The crown reminds us that Jesus has suffered, Jesus has been in pain, and he came back. And then when we suffer, and then when we are in pain, we are never alone, friends. But we serve a King, we serve a Lord who has suffered with us. We serve a King and we serve a Lord who has suffered everything we have suffered and more, and understands our hurt and understands our pain. That's the glory of our King. That's the glory of our Lord, friends, that we are not alone. See, a king like the Emperor Augustus was separate and apart. He never had want. He never worried if he would have enough food. He would never worry if his family members were sick. He would never worry if his family members would die, because he had the best of everything. He would never worry if he would be warm enough at night in the winter. But Christ did. Christ experienced hunger. Christ experienced pain. Christ experienced cold, and Christ experienced fear. He experienced all the things we experience every single day, so that we know when we experience them, we are not alone. And that's the glory of the King we serve, is that we are not alone. You see, Christ didn't have a throne room like the emperor did. He didn't have some beautiful throne set above people. Christ's throne room is our lives. Because Christ doesn't make, you may say our churches are his throne room, but I think even Christ wouldn't like that. Because his throne room is our lives. His throne room is our walk. His throne room is how we show his word. Because Christ isn't just above us or around us. Christ is among us. So close that he is right next to you. So close that he can hear your breath. And he knows who you are. We are never alone, friends. Because Christ's throne is beside us always. Amongst us and around us. Jesus is our King, and Jesus is always around us. We serve a King who is always present. And the truth is that we could end the story there, but that's not enough, because Christ calls us deeper. Not only does Christ call us to show us what it means to be a servant, Christ calls us to be a servant. Christ calls us to go one deeper, step deeper, and to do the dirty jobs. In that John passage, he talks about living, following his example, washing the feet of other people. And now, this rarely means we actually do a dirty job like a lift pump tech, but maybe sometimes it does. But rarely do we realize how dirty it is how dirty we get getting in people's lives in a real way. When we form relationships with people that are in pain, it gets dirty. When we form relationships with people that make bad decisions over and over and over again and we can't fix it, but we still choose to be in relationship with them, it gets dirty. And friends, when we make bad decisions, when we mess up and when we are in pain, and other people in a relationship with us, it gets dirty. But again and again and again, Christ shows us what this means. Choosing to sit with people in their pain, choosing to sit with people in their suffering. We must make choices to serve and to be there for the least of these, to be there for the needy friends. That's what serving Jesus looks a lot like. And I've seen a lot of people do this well. I've seen a lot of people in this church do this well. And that's been awesome, because I love to be part of the service attitude of this church. But I have one friend who is particularly good at this. It's my friend Abby. She is a pastor at our church we went to in Austin. And one thing about Abby is she was always busy. If you tell her something during Sunday, she was like, you have to email me because I won't remember it. She's always bustling to and fro, and she's always getting involved in the lives of people that are in pain. Shortly after we started, we decided that we wanted to have a potluck lunch at the church, which is something Methodists do. All Methodists love potlucks. We all love our fried chicken and our casseroles. And that's always exciting. But instead of on Sundays after church, we decided to have our potlucks on Saturdays at noon. And instead of just the church members, we decided, we should invite other people to the potlucks too. People that just want a lunch. And so Abby challenged us to go to the local apartment complexes that were in the low-income apartment complexes. And so we went door to door knocking and inviting people to lunch. And slowly over time, those people started trusting us and coming. And we started forming relationships with people that were struggling. People that were in pain. People's lives who were messy and dirty. And it changed us. Because Abby called us to get dirty. Abby called us to get into messy people's lives, because that's what being Christ looks like. Abby pushed us further and further. She even went to the exotic dance club near the church and talked to the ladies that worked there and said, you are loved by God, no matter who you are. And just come have lunch with us. It's free. It's a pretty tasty hamburger. And people would come. And they wouldn't feel judged. They would just be a place to eat. And no one knew what anyone else did, but it was a place where they were welcome. Because friends, that's what Christ is like. And over time, those meals became more and more diverse, more and more unique. And I would sit back and look at the people sitting around the tables eating, because it wasn't a soup kitchen line. It was all of us eating together, mixed up in tables together. And over time, different people, looking different, speaking different, living differently. It was God's kingdom, friends, right in front of us. And that's our call. Getting in the lives of people that are messy is hard. But that's the best kind of dirty job. It's the kind of dirty job that lasts a lifetime and changes lives. Friends, as we get ready for Christmas, as we get ready to shop and to stress, and to have more stress and to shop some more, let us remember we serve a king. A king who's wrapped in a dirty old bleached towel, with a crown on his head and a staff in his hand. A king who calls us into the dirty junk of lives, the dirty, messy lives of the people around us. Because that's where Christ is. He's been there before us, and He's calling us to join in. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.